Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. Okay, so I'm not usually the type to air out family stuff on the internet, but this whole thing has been sitting on my chest like a ton of bricks, and I honestly don't know where else to put it. For context, I'm 28, my younger brother Ryan is 24, and my parents are, well, you'll see. We didn't grow up super wealthy, but once my dad's company hit a stride a few years back, things changed fast. New house, nicer cars, expensive vacations, we upgraded across the board. It's great, I guess, but money has a funny way of making favoritism way more obvious. And Ryan? He's been the golden child since day one. I know everyone thinks they're the neglected sibling, but I'm not talking about a few unfair moments. I mean full-on, systemic, built into the family DNA type favoritism. He screws up, and it's brushed off with a joke. I make a small mistake, and it turns into a long, quiet conversation about disappointment. He barely scraped through high school, and they called it resilience. I got a full scholarship and heard, well, you've always been the bookish one. Over time, I learned to just roll with it. I left home, got a job, paid my bills, and stayed out of trouble. I didn't call for money or help. That seemed to be what they expected, me managing on my own, not needing much. And then one weekend, I came home to visit. That's when I saw the Tesla in the driveway. Brand new. Matte gray. Still had the little delivery sticker on the window. At first, I thought maybe my dad had bought a new car. But no. Turns out, it was for Ryan. Not as a graduation gift. Not for landing a new job. Nothing like that. Just a surprise gift. I didn't get the full explanation until dinner. My mom said they thought he could use something to help him stay focused. My dad added that he'd been going through a lot lately. As if that justified dropping a pile of money on a luxury car. Meanwhile, I've been driving the same hand-me-down Corolla for the last 6 years and patching it up with duct tape and hope. I kept quiet that night, smiled, nodded, ate my dinner, and didn't say anything sarcastic when Ryan talked about how it drives itself and feels like I'm in the future. Honestly, he didn't even seem that excited, just smug. Like he expected it. Like this wasn't even that big of a deal. I went back home the next day trying to convince myself I was overreacting and that it wasn't worth causing drama. 3 weeks later, Ryan totaled the car. I took a turn way too fast, lost control, and hit a guardrail hard enough to set off the airbags. He walked away without a scratch, thank God. But the car? Completely done. And this is where the story takes a turn. A few days after the crash, I get a call from my mom. Not to check in. Not to talk about Ryan's recovery. She called to ask me a favor. She wanted me to say I had been driving the car when it crashed. At first, I honestly thought she was joking. I laughed, like an idiot, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. She stayed completely serious, calm, even, as if asking me to take the fall for totaling a Tesla was the kind of thing that happened in regular families all the time. It just makes more sense, she said like she was walking me through some very reasonable favor. Ryan's already had a few infractions. We can't risk him losing his license. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the phone, staring at the wall like the drywall was going to offer me an out. You want me to lie to the insurance company? And the police? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. It's not a big deal. You've got a clean record. No one's going to think twice about it. That made it okay. As if my clean record was some kind of family asset they could borrow whenever Ryan messed up. I was so stunned I couldn't even respond at first. And then she added, it's just one little favor. You're always the responsible one. We trust you to handle it. That was the moment the shock wore off and the anger kicked in. It was like something snapped. Not in a dramatic, yelling way. Just internally. Quiet and final. Because I finally saw it for what it was, they didn't just favor Ryan. They saw me as a backup plan. The one they could count on to keep things running smoothly while Ryan lit everything on fire. The responsible one wasn't a compliment. It was a role. One that let them hand me the consequences of everyone else's chaos. I told her no. Flat out. No explanation. No softened edges. Just no. And the silence on the other end of the phone? You'd think I'd cursed at her. After a pause, she said, I'm disappointed. I thought you'd be willing to help your brother. That was the part that stuck with me. Not the request itself. The guilt trip. She wasn't mad that Ryan had been reckless. She was mad that I wasn't willing to clean it up. Later that night, my dad called. Same routine, different voice. This isn't a big deal. It's just to get the paperwork settled. I asked him if he understood what he was asking me to do. It's not like you'd be getting in trouble. You weren't even ticketed. It's just about whose name is on the report. I felt like I was being gaslit in slow motion. Like they were trying to will a reality into existence where this was all reasonable. I told him no too. And this time, I didn't just say no, I told him exactly why. That I was tired of being the one expected to sacrifice. That I was done carrying weight that didn't belong to me. That I wasn't going to be Ryan's safety net anymore. He hung up without saying goodbye. The fallout came fast. Ryan didn't call. He never does when things get hard. But my parents? I got a string of texts over the next few days. All variations of the same message. We just don't understand why you're being so cold. He's your brother. Family means helping each other through hard times. It was like watching people recite lines from a script they didn't realize I'd finally stopped believing in. They weren't asking me to help. They were demanding I keep playing the role I never auditioned for. And when I refused, they acted like I was the one who'd betrayed them. The thing about drawing a boundary for the first time is that it feels weird, not empowering, not dramatic, just awkward, unsettling. Like you're throwing off the balance of a system that everyone else was perfectly fine with, even if it never worked for you. After the call with my dad and the text from my mom, I half expected someone to try again. Another plea. Maybe even a guilt-filled voicemail from Ryan pretending to care just long enough to get what he wanted. But nothing came. And I started to realize something. They weren't used to me saying no, so they didn't know what to do when I stuck to it. The silence wasn't space, it was punishment. They were hoping I'd feel guilty enough to crawl back. And for a few days, I almost did. Old habits die hard. I'd spent most of my life smoothing things over. Being the calm one. The fixer. The one who didn't ask for much because I knew it wouldn't be given anyway. Saying no felt like breaking a promise I never agreed to. But then I remembered something. Back when I first moved out, I asked for a small loan. Nothing crazy, just a bit to help cover the deposit on a new apartment after my roommate bailed on me last minute. My mom told me, "We'd love to help, but you must learn how to stand on your own." At the time, I agreed. Thought maybe she was right. But that memory hit differently now. Because that same mom had just handed Ryan a Tesla because he was feeling a little stuck. So no, I wasn't crawling back. And if the price for that was a little uncomfortable silence, I could live with that. Things got even weirder a week later. My cousin Emily reached out, someone I hadn't talked to in a while. We were never super close, but she always kept tabs on family drama in a low-key, observant kind of way. "Hey, did something happen between you and your folks?" I asked why. She said Ryan had posted a vague story on Instagram, black background, white text, the whole cryptic message for attention vibe. It read, "When family lets you down, who do you even trust anymore?" Of course, the classic victim playbook. He didn't tag me, didn't name names, but it didn't take a genius to figure out what he was doing. I didn't respond to it, didn't comment, didn't message him, didn't do anything to let him know it had gotten under my skin. Instead, I archived the whole thing. Because here's the thing, the second you stop playing the role they've cast you in, they panic. Not because you've changed, but because you stopped being predictable. My parents didn't say anything about the post. But 2 days after that, I got a group text, yes, a group text from my mom. Just me, her, my dad, and Ryan. It said, "We think it's time to put this behind us. Let's get dinner this weekend and talk like a family." That was the line that did it for me. Not the Tesla. Not a lie. That sentence. Like nothing had happened. Like this was just some miscommunication to be smoothed over with pasta and forced small talk. They didn't want to talk. They wanted me to drop it. To pretend nothing had happened, because accountability makes them uncomfortable. And for the first time, I realized I didn't owe them closure. I didn't owe them reconciliation. They could sit in the silence they created. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I didn't respond to the group text. Not out of spite. Not to be dramatic. But because there wasn't anything left to say. I'd already made my stance clear, and if they wanted to act like this was just a little disagreement, some family hiccup that could be smoothed over with dinner and forgive and forget vibes, they weren't hearing me anyway. And honestly, I was tired of being the translator for my boundaries. So I let the message sit there, unread. And apparently, that was what finally pushed things over the edge. The next day, I got a call from my dad. Straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. An hour later, a second call. Then a third. I finally picked up, more out of exhaustion than anything else. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" He said, no greeting, no easing in. I stayed silent. Let him fill the space. You're making this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. Your mother and I are trying to keep this family together, and you're acting like some outsider. That word hit hard. Outsider. Not disappointed, not hurt, but other. Like by standing up for myself, I'd removed myself from the tribe. I let out a breath and said, I'm not making this into anything. You asked me to lie. That was the issue. We didn't say lie. We asked for help. It's the same thing we would have done for you. I laughed. Because no, they wouldn't have. And we both knew it. If I had crashed a $60,000 car my parents bought me on a whim, I wouldn't have been offered a scapegoat. I would have been lectured, grounded, yes, even at 28, and handed a bill for the damages. Ryan? He gets a rewrite of the entire story. And now that I refuse to play along, I was suddenly selfish, disrespectful, an outsider. A few days later, I found out from a different cousin, because no one tells me anything directly anymore, that Ryan and my parents were telling people I had offered to lie and then backed out at the last minute. Let that sink in. They were saying I volunteered to take the blame, then abandoned them when it got complicated. It wasn't just a lie. It was a deliberate effort to make me look flaky, unreliable, and disloyal. I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd done, years of keeping quiet, letting things slide, being the one who never asked for anything, they were still trying to spin me into the villain. So that's when I decided to stop playing defense. I posted the whole story online, not with names, not with direct callouts, but with enough detail that anyone in the family chat would know exactly what I was talking about. I laid it all out, how the car was a gift, how it got wrecked, how I was asked to take the fall, how I said no. I even included screenshots of the text where my mom said, "We trust you to handle it." And then I left it. No comments. No arguing. Just facts. Because if they wanted to tell stories, fine. But I wasn't going to stay silent while they rewrote mine. The post didn't go viral or anything, but in our little corner of the family tree, it hit like a thunderclap. Within a few hours, I started getting messages. Some from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, some from aunts who usually only texted holiday gifts in group chats. Most of them started with, "I had no idea." Others said, "Honestly, I always kind of sensed it." A couple of people even apologized for not speaking up sooner, for laughing along when Ryan made jokes at my expense, and for staying quiet whenever I got the short end of the stick at family gatherings. None of it fixed anything, but it was validating in a way I didn't expect. Because for the first time, I wasn't the only one saying the emperor had no clothes. I wasn't alone in seeing the imbalance. And more importantly, people were finally seeing Ryan and my parents for who they really were. Then came the messages from my mom. Dozens of them. At first, they were angry. How could you air private family business like that? You're making us look bad over a misunderstanding. This is so childish. But after a while, the tone shifted. People are starting to ask questions. You're tearing this family apart. Please take the post down. We can talk this through. That last one made me laugh. Because we did try to talk. They just didn't like what I had to say. Now that they were dealing with the fallout, suddenly communication was a priority. But it was too late. I wasn't trying to destroy the family. I wasn't even trying to get revenge. I just wanted to stop being the designated scapegoat. And if shining a light on the truth made people uncomfortable, that wasn't my problem anymore. A week later, I got a call from Ryan. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. He opened with, "What the hell is your problem?" No apology. No ownership. Just straight up rage. He said I'd humiliated him, and that now people were looking at him differently. And all I could think was, good. He deserved to be looked at differently. He wasn't the charming screw-up who just needed a few more chances. He was a grown man who let his parents cover for him, then lied about it when it didn't work. I didn't even yell. I just let him rant. Eventually, he ran out of steam. That's when I said, "You don't get to be mad at me for telling the truth. You're mad because it worked." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. A few people in the family are still neutral classic fence-sitters who just want the drama to go away. They say things like, "It's between you and your parents," or "You both could have handled it better." But I've stopped trying to win those people over. If they can't tell the difference between drawing a boundary and throwing a tantrum, that's on them. I don't need everyone in my corner. I just need myself out of theirs. It's strange how quiet things get when you finally stop chasing approval. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call, a text, or a family invite with strings attached. I wasn't bracing myself for the next guilt trip or backhanded compliment disguised as concern. I had removed myself from the system entirely, and the silence that followed wasn't loneliness. It was a relief. I started to notice how much mental space had been taken up by trying to manage everyone else's comfort. How many times I'd reshaped myself to be easier to swallow. How often I'd played the peacekeeper, the buffer, the one who let things go, so we could all pretend things were fine. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, I had room to just live. I threw myself into work in a way that felt fulfilling. Spent time with friends who didn't expect me to shrink to fit into their version of who I should be. I started sleeping better, laughing more. No constant undertone of resentment humming in the background. It felt like I'd finally stepped into my own life. Then something unexpected happened. My aunt, my dad's sister, reached out. We weren't especially close growing up, but she'd always been kind. She messaged me out of the blue and said she'd read the post. Said she'd always seen the favoritism but never knew how deep it went. Then she said something that hit me harder than I expected. You're not wrong for standing up for yourself. Some people just aren't ready to admit how much they benefit from your silence. That line stuck with me. Because she got it. It wasn't just about the car. Or the lie. It was about years of being expected to quietly absorb whatever the family needed me to carry. And now that I wasn't doing it anymore, they didn't know how to function. I didn't post any follow-ups. Didn't try to spin a victory story or show receipts of who apologized and who didn't. The truth was out there. That was enough. The people who mattered saw it. The ones who didn't, well, they were never really in my corner to begin with. And as far as my parents and Ryan, they've gone radio silent. I think, in their minds, I committed some kind of ultimate betrayal. Not by lying, but by telling the truth out loud. But here's the thing. I'm not angry anymore. I don't hate them. I just finally understand that love without respect isn't love. It's an obligation. And I'm not obligated to keep shrinking so other people don't have to grow. It's been a few months now. No more calls. No texts. No vague posts. No surprise pop-ins. For the first time in, probably ever, things are quiet. And not the kind of quiet that comes before another storm, just actual peace. I used to think that drawing a line would blow everything up. It would destroy relationships, start fights, and break down whatever fragile structure held the family together. But the truth is that structure was already cracked. All I did was stop pretending it wasn't. A few people in the family still try to nudge things back to normal. My mom's cousin messaged me the other day and said she hopes things heal with time. One of my uncles asked if I'd considered being the bigger person and making the first move. But the more I sit with it, the more I realize something I probably should have learned a long time ago. Being the bigger person doesn't mean carrying the weight for everyone else. It means knowing when enough is enough. It means refusing to be the landing pad for someone else's bad choices. It means walking away with your dignity intact, even when they try to make you feel like you're abandoning them. Do I miss having a family I could rely on? Sure. But I've also stopped romanticizing what never really existed. I used to think we were just a few conversations away from fixing everything. That if I could explain myself better, or stay calm enough, or find the right words, they'd finally hear me. But they never wanted to hear me. They wanted me quiet, compliant. And now that I'm neither, they don't know what to do with me. That's not my burden to carry. Ryan hasn't posted anything dramatic since our last phone call. No more vague stories. No more family betrayal monologues. I don't know if he's embarrassed, angry, indifferent. Honestly, I don't care. We've always been two people playing out roles we didn't choose. He got the part of the one who could do no wrong. I got the one who was supposed to be okay with that. Only now, I've dropped the script. And it's funny. Once you stop playing your part, the whole performance falls apart. So yeah, I guess the short version is. My brother crashed a Tesla that my parents bought him for no reason and asked me to lie to cover it up. And when I said no, I became the villain. But I'm okay with that. Because villains don't carry other people's shame. Villains get to live their own lives. Villains get peace. And if that's what I am to them now, then so be it.